if you're taking my advice on buying one of these and using a discount code or whatever, hold them to this standard, because I think this one is particularly good, but it could be a YouTube special. Here we have another very expensive direct-to-consumer Chinese frame. They're very expensive. This is near as makes no difference, $2,000 US. It's about the same price as that Tavelo behind me. And you saw in that video, it didn't go too well. It wasn't up to scratch. The quality wasn't there. The bottom bracket was undersized. The seat post wouldn't go in the frame. The seat clamp had burrs all over it. And considering I can go and get a Giant TCR, which is the benchmark road bike, I can go and get a Giant TCR Advance Pro in my size, current model year, yes, with a few deal hunts, for $16,999. This is pretty much the same price in USD. This is $1,780 to $1,980. It's more expensive for the colour scheme that I've got here. These have to be really good. I don't know if the Chinese brands don't suffer the same economic problems as the Western brands, because Western brands are just slashing frame prices across the board. For instance, I can also find a TCR Advance SL, the one with the integrated seat post, the top flagship frame, for £2,000, $1,999 in my size. Let's go tip to butt. Actually, no, we'll start at the bottom bracket and have a look at all the quality features on this frame, because like I said in the other video, the Tavelo video, once these things are built up and all the little niggles are sorted out, they're all the bloody same. They're all so similar. They just hang the parts in the same places, more or less. And if you shut your eyes, you wouldn't know if you're riding one brand versus another. And that goes to Chinese brands, goes to Western brands. Yes, there are little nuances in comfort and stiffness, but in general, I think frames are so similar. And the most important thing for me, which is why you're watching this video, is the quality. Are you getting quality for your money? I don't want you to waste money. Now, Winspace, full disclosure, have sent this for free, expecting free marketing. They know the risks because they probably watched the Tavelo video. So have they made this a YouTube special? I'm being skeptical, maybe, because, spoiler alert, this is actually quite a good frame. They've gone back to basics with the design. Some things I really like, some things I still don't like. But without further ado, let's look at this dusty hole, the bottom bracket. And I'll say dusty because it has been post-machined down to size, and the size is absolutely what I would say for BB86. So this is pressed for 86. This is Shimano plastic bottom bracket capable, is spot on. This is 40.96. It's 40.97 in some areas, but it's almost what I would say is perfect. 40.98. I'll zoom in for you there. On the other side, in places a little bit smaller, 40.97. But yeah, in general, I think this is really, really good. But it has been abraded. It has been post-machined after moulding. Now, that's good and that's bad. It's good because the bottom bracket will go straight in, whether using a metal one. If you haven't seen that bottom bracket video, I'll leave a link on the screen here. If this goes out before it might do, I don't know. The downside about this, the only downside, if I'm being really picky, is that now they've exposed the raw carbon fibres of the bottom bracket shell. If you do put a metal sleeved bottom bracket in there, there may be the chance of some corrosion galvanically linking with water or sweat or whatever, or salt water off winter roads, the aluminium to the carbon. So make sure, I mean, I don't know what the dielectric constant of grease or Loctite is, but you might want to think about not using a metal bottom bracket in this after they've exposed those raw carbon fibres if you want it to last for ages and not corrode and not do crusty things to the bottom bracket shell. In reality, if you're using an anodized shell and it's got grease on it, it's probably going to be all right. These frames are EPS molded, which means they have like a former inside them, which is a 3D foam. And then when the frame's cooked, that kind of shrinks a bit, but they do need to pull it out. We'll quickly talk, whilst we're down here at the bottom end, quickly talk about tyre clearance. It's specified for a 32. It looks pretty much the same as my TCR, so you'd probably be able to fit a 34 measured 32 in there, maybe even a bit bigger, but it's certainly not an all-road frame or a gravel frame. The dropouts I'm not a massive fan of, and you know I've said in videos a lot before about these blind holes for the threads in the dropouts. They could, now I'm being picky here, but that's why you're at the channel, they could give you problems. If you fuck that thread up, or you round off the hex in your through axle with your 5 or 6 mil Allen key, there's no getting the axle out. It's pretty much game over, because you cannot access the axle from the other side. Now, some through axles actually have quite a clever design where they've got a hex broached into both ends of the axle. So you've also got the normal end where you put your Allen key, but there's like a backup Allen key slot, a hex broached into it, which means cut into it. So if you do round off, the cap head side, you can get to the other side. Now, with these systems, you can't. And they do it for aesthetic reasons, right? It just looks, better in some people's eyes if it's smoothed off and blind, but you have to be really careful. If you travel with your bike a lot, if you're getting the wheels on and off a lot, like if you're racing or flying or just putting it in and out the car, be very, very careful not to damage these threads or round off the axle. Now, I've said this in other videos. I said it in the Yolio video, and I said it in the Yolio video. Yolio and Tavello. God, all these Chinese names. Yolio and Tavello videos. It's better to have, in my opinion, the axle thread in a separate part. So almost like a UDH spec. And it's actually easier for the frame company to do that. All they've got to do is leave a hole there, because the thread is in a separate part which goes on afterwards. It's part of the dropout. So if you ever mess up that thread or damage it, you can just put a new one in. But if you ever mess up this thread, it's bonded into the carbon, it's in molded, and it's game over, and it's not anodized either. So could that gall up over time? Possibly. Now that's a very, very minor point. Moving on to the other side, the brake mounts. These are actually got metal inserts. So that aluminium insert bonded into the carbon or in molded into the carbon. They're not anodized, they're raw. Is that going to be a corrosion problem? Very, very long term, maybe. However, they're not faced to the Shimano diagram, and that's the same with the fork. So the Shimano diagram says that this whole area, this shaded area, and I'll drop in the picture here, has to be faced flat with no, they say something like no prong higher than whatever. But that's because if you put an adapter plate on there, they'll be sitting on the paint. And obviously some newer Shimano calipers, like the newer Dura Ace calipers, they have kind of two bosses which sit on there, and it probably won't be a problem. But if you've got an adapter plate on there, like you're running a 160 or a 180 or whatever, the adapter plate will end up sitting on the paintwork. And this is so common in frames that none of them actually listen to the Shimano guidelines on how to do this. And you end up bolting your adapter down onto the paintwork. It's not such a bad problem. It's not going to cause any issues, but it might cock the brakes slightly off alignment, so it's not perpendicular or parallel with the disc. Just a minor point, and that's the same on the fork. Bottom bracket, dropout's done. Now, what should we talk about next? Let's talk about the seat tube. So one of the best things about this frame, in my eyes, is a 27.2mm seat tube. It slides in a dream. Oh, look at that, ease its passage. I haven't even eased its passage. Obviously, you can fit any seat post you like in there if you don't want to use this one. This one is pretty damn light. I think I weighed it's like 160 grams out of the box. It's got a single clamp though, and I really don't like this. And the way you do the pitch adjustment is a central draw bolt. I've had these slips so many times on different bikes, had them slipping on the Tavello. I don't like the single pinch bolt one. If you're a heavy rider like me, it's very easy to get the nose to slip down. Or if you've got the saddle wallet all the way back, you can slip it down the other way. And the way it works is that the knurled parts on these conical, they bite directly into the carbon, and then that's fine if you do it once and you don't change it. But if that slips, it then and strips away the carbon, and it'll just slip and slip and slip and get worse and worse and worse. So I just really don't like these. A 2-bolt system would be so much better. This has got a 15mm layback. There's no reason why you couldn't flip it and have it the other way. But if you want to change this for a different type of seat post, a stiffer one, a more comfortable one, you can put any 27.2 seat post in this. Hell, you could even put a dropper post in it. Seat post clamp, I really do like this. It's a normal seat post clamp. God praise it. They're back. Gone are the stupid wedges that slip, damage the seat post, and are quite bulky and heavy. This is just a normal collar, and the best thing about this is it's got a barrel nut in it. So the thread has no bending moment on it when you do it up. Now these are the tiny little things that I get so excited about. This is good design. Whether Winspace have thought about this on purpose or they've just bought this out of a catalogue, I don't know. But when you do the bolt up in a C-clamp, the ends of the C-clamp come in, and the through hole for where the bolt goes and the thread end up getting misaligned, and that puts a bending moment on the bolt thread and on the internal thread in here. And I've had a C-clamp fail like that in the past on my old Super 6. They had a very light, I think it's made by FSA probably, a very light clamp, and repeated undoing and doing fatigued that thread, so it just stripped the thread and it broke the bolt. This shouldn't happen because the barrel nut can swivel as the angle of the bolt changes, so there's no bending moment on the threads. I really, really like that. Just a tiny little feature, and this weighs 18 grams. Like, I know I don't care about weight, but if you do care about weight, you can't beat a normal round collar. So I really like the seat post and the collar, apart from that 1-bolt head, as I mentioned. Now, what else can we say? Moving on to the headset. Very, very good finish inside the head tube. The bearings, they're a little bit loose in the frame. Not the worst I've seen. The holes are round, at least, and there's a uniform thickness of carbon around the bearing. Internal finish is very good, and I think these are stainless bearings, which is nice to see, and they also actually, small point, have the bearing spec written on them, so when you need to replace them, it's dead easy to get a new one. So let's actually look at the headset system and how that goes together. Now, this is the FSA ACR headset system, which is pretty widely proven to work. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but you can ride it with a normal stem, or you can ride it with a kind of integrated bar, and you just take that top cap spacer off. They're all spigoted and notched together, pinned together for alignment, and this is the part you'd use if you wanted to run a normal stem, which I probably will, better for bike fit anyway. So I'll be using that chimney, and talking about chimneys, I probably actually will be using the whole chimney stack on this, because I don't know what it is with these Chinese frame companies. They've got no one in the office when they do the geometry that's obviously a tall person, because their biggest size in, you know, Winspace, Tavello or Big Rock or whatever it is always like so much lower in stack than a Western frame. So if you take a TCR, I'm referring to the TCR because it is the all-round benchmark. That's a low racy front end for me. That's a 596 stack. This one, in the same sort of size in terms of reach and stuff, is 15 to 20 mil lower. I can't get a bigger size than this. It's the biggest size they do. So it's going to have all the chimney on it. I said with the Tavello, I'd like to actually have that higher as well. Couldn't get that any higher. So to visualize this, plotted the SLC 3XL in terms of stack and reach on a graph with a few other common road bikes. So I've got the Tarmac and the TCR. Anyway, you can see the biggest SL3, the XL, is somewhere between a 56 Tarmac and a large TCR. So it's actually a very small bike. The 58 Tarmac is a lot higher and a little bit longer. And then you can see my TCR XL on here is the kind of longest bike out there, I think. Much longer than the biggest Tarmac you can get. And it's actually more similar in stack to a 58 Tarmac SL8. It's a very small bike, the SL3, even though the biggest size is called an XL. But if we look at the seat tube length, which dictates how much seat post you're going to have sticking out and kind of how comfy the bike is with the whip on the seat post, you can see that the seat tube length of the SL3 is kind of equivalent to the other bikes anyway. So it's the same as the TCR XL, basically exactly the same. It's longer than the 58 Tarmac. It's actually longer than the 61 Tarmac. And it's longer than the TCR L. So it's a very odd shaped bike. I think if they're going to stick with this geometry, first of all, they need to call it a large, and they need to slope the top tube more to get less seat tube. Or if they keep that seat tube length at 550, then they need to increase the stack, because you can see from the stack numbers, it's just super low and very, very short. So it's a bit of a weird one for tall riders, at least. Your mileage may vary, but I do encourage you to check out the geometry and plot it on a simple graph like this. You can get the geometry off Geometry Geeks, and it just helps you visualize it against bikes you already know before you press buy. But yeah, these Chinese frames, I just don't know why they're so low at the front end, because slammed is not fast. If you can't hold that parallel forearm position on the hoods because it's too low, that's not fast. I'd like to see the geometries of these Chinese frames. Obviously, we are their target market. I don't think they sell many of these in mainland China, so they need to approach the geometry with a new look, I think. I think the smaller sizes are fine, but the bigger sizes are just odd. So the seat tube is the right length for the amount of seat post I want sticking out. The head tube's too short. But yeah, so it's going to look a bit ugly with all the chimney on. Anyway, going back to the headset, I digress. You've also got the split spacers here, the FSA kind of stock design spacers and the FSA top cap. Now, I said in the Tavello video, that Tavello has teed me up so well for this. It's so easy. I didn't even have to think about doing this kind of voiceover. This actually does have a rubber lip seal on it, which mates to the top tube. So that's really cool to see. It's got a press fit little wiper seal on there. Very rare to see nowadays on these integrated systems. You used to get them on the old A headset design on the top cap with a little rubber lip seal. Good to see FSA still doing things properly. Now, there are loads of other places for the water to get in, like down there. So that's it's going to keep the water in as well. So yeah, sort of odd, but it's nice to see they've at least tried. This is the compression ring that goes on the fork. Now, interestingly, these compression rings are getting bigger to distribute the kind of pinching load on the fork a lot better. The downside about making them bigger is they're getting a lot stiffer. So when you preload it with a top bolt, because it's much thicker, it's harder for it to squeeze in. So you get less pinching force on the steer tube, and it's actually harder to take the wobble on the play out of the headset. So what they've done is they've made, and you can tell this fork has been post-machined, it's been abraded at the top. They've made this a really close, you can hear that, a really close fit on the steer tube. So basically, it's already quite tight, so you don't really need to preload it that much to take the play out. Now, this is kind of a hybrid solution between what we used to have and that Frameworks frame, where they do away with the compression ring altogether and they just go for a very tight mated fit on the steerer tube. Interestingly to see, there's actually like a grip blasted or a sand blasted portion at the back of this, which is a nice little feature. And I think that's to stop it rotating on assembly, which is quite nice because that really does grip the fork. But this relies on the fork being machined to a very specific diameter, and you can tell it's definitely had that abrasion machining after being made. The only thing I don't like about this is the cable entry, or the cable exit, or the hydraulic hose exit point is very close to the crown, and I wouldn't put such a big stress razor so close to that join at the crown there, and there's a lot of filler in there as well. Normally with forks you have the front brake hose milled slot a little bit further up, away from any stress concentrations. It's probably quite a thick wall thickness down there, so fingers crossed it'll be all right. It's covered in QC pass stickers. There's about 3 or 4 on here. There's literally 4 QC pass stickers on here. Pretty crazy. The only thing I don't like is that when they've masked it for the clear lacquer, which is obviously a very thick luster, they've masked it that side of the bearing seat, so the bearing seat's covered in clear lacquer as well. Realistically, I don't think it's going to make a massive issue, but it's going to make that top bearing sit a little bit higher up than it should do, so you're going to get a more visible gap at the bottom of the frame. Wall thickness, very, very thick. Nice to see. A lot more material than the D-shaped steerers we see out there, and machining wise inside it looks to be nicely finished. And the top cap, the expander bung and top cap go in there nice and easily. Unlike the Tavello one, I could barely get it in, as you saw, and when I pulled out it broke all the O-rings. This is a standard token one. It's quite deep, which is nice to see, so there's a lot of clamping area for your stem. Drops in no problem. So, back to basics there, quite nicely made. They haven't tried to reinvent the wheel, they've just bought something that works from token. So big fan of that. Not the lightest, but reliable and safe. So in total, the headset system is pretty simple. It's the FSA ACR one. It's kind of proven now. Nice to see them using something proven rather than try and do something proprietary and fiddly. I'll build it up. It's very light if you care about weight. Now, weight is an overstated performance metric. Doesn't really matter for me. I'm so heavy, whether it's 1,100 kilos, 1,100 grams or 800 grams. I think when I weighed this one, it was 880, which I think for an XL frame is pretty damn good. But yeah, whether it's 300 grams different, it doesn't really matter to me, to be honest. The other good thing about this is you can build it up, because of this FSA headset system, which is not the prettiest, I'll admit. You can build up with mechanical, because the crescent moon bit and the spacers have plenty of clearance for mechanical cables, so you can build out with mechanical group set if you want. Wait for the ride review. Now, as you know, I don't offer discount codes if I don't rate something, so I didn't offer one for the Tavello. I do rate this so far. I'm going to offer a discount code if you want to take a punt on it. It is expensive, this frame, but I'll leave it on screen here. I think it's the same code that I've had for Winspace wheels for yonks, and they've proven themselves to be, on the whole, very good in the market. So good to see that Winspace still know how to do quality things. I hope it's not a Peak Talk special. If you get one of these and you measure the bottom bracket and it's out, get onto them. They need to be held to this quality in this video, and I genuinely think this is pretty damn good. So get onto them and say, look, the one that Peak Talk got was this, my one's undersized or oversized. Do not accept it. Just do not accept it. Do not have your local bike shop build it up. If you're taking my advice on buying one of these and using a discount code or whatever, hold them to this standard, because I think this one is particularly good, but it could be a YouTube special. Anyway, stay tuned for the build review, ride review. Obviously the ride review is probably just going to be like all the other frames. I don't think it's going to throw any issues out. We'll see if, it's easy to get preload on the fork, and I think that's safe. And, if the seat slips, but apart from that, I think this is Winspace kind of going back to basics, less integrated stuff, less proprietary stuff, normal seat post, normal clamp, proven headset system, and yeah, good bottom bracket. Now we're looking through the top of the head tube down into the down tube, and I've put some 15mm pipe lagging in the down tube around the rear brake hose, just because I do not want any noises from this bike. I want it to be silent. Di2 wiring in, and these modern EPS molded frames are so much easier to route than the old ones. There's no like wrinkles or clumps of carbon or epoxy that just block the cables. Pretty easy. So I'm still using a bit of sheathing to get everything through, but so far it's been a doddle. So I've just been down the builder's yard to get some M10 threaded bar. Got a couple of nuts to use as a bolt head, because I didn't actually have anything long enough to put this in. Now, I made that video about the plastic bottom brackets, and I'm actually going to use a non-plastic bottom bracket. Having said that, I was supposed to be using a Bocconi, their one-piece bottom bracket. Actually, no, their two-piece kind of metal version of the Shimano plastic one, just to see if there's any differences. And I basically want to reproduce that test, that loaded friction test that they did in a frame, so you get a better representative result. So I'm going to use a one-piece metal one, a two-piece metal one, and then the two-piece plastic one, and see if there's any differences. So I'm going to start off with this one-piece one because it is the kind of hardest to get in and out. So I'm going to press this in. This one's made by Ahem, the wheel brand from Singapore. It's a pretty damn fine piece of machining, highly polished and then anodized. And I think it's got NTN or NSKs inside it. So I'm not sure they'll last that long because the weatherproofing's not very good. But now obviously I've checked that this frame is the right size before I'm putting a metal one in, a one-piece metal one. Let me stress that. There's not much give in these things, and if you put it in an undersized frame, it might crack it. But this frame is pretty good. If you jam these two nuts together really tight, lock nut, you can unwind it and it'll stick. It'll basically create a little bolt head, top tip. Now I can't comment on the ease of routing through the Winspace handlebars because I don't have any, so I'm using this Farsport F1 S bar, absolute piece of kit, massive holes, really easy to route, very smooth inside. I've made some 3D printed end caps for the hydraulic hoses so you don't lose all your fluid when you cut your hoses. So for the sake of comparison with the framework bottom bracket, this is the Ascent bottom bracket in the Winspace frame. Pretty damn good, and that's preloaded on the other side. So frame's good, bottom bracket's good, and that's the result. Unfortunately, again, no chainstay protection on this frame or in the box. I've already chipped the paint, so I dropped an Allen key on it. So yeah, could do with the chainstay protector. So quick first ride impressions, and how did it go together? Despite the stupid amount of chimney sticking out for an XL frame and the very short head tube, I'm super impressed by this bike. Went together really, really easy. Rides like a dream. It is quite light frame, if you care about that. Obviously the parts I've got on it aren't the lightest. Got some quite deep wheels and, you know, heavy Ultegra cranks. But yeah, pretty damn impressed with this setup, to be honest. Yeah, just went together really well. Super easy to build. And the Farsports F1 handlebar, because the cable ports in that are pretty damn big, that was quite easy to route. This is actually a 31.8 clamp, so I've got a reducer in there which comes with the F1S, and I've actually managed to get a bit more rise out of it as well, because it does come with two angled, well, it comes with an angled reducer and a straight reducer to a 1 1/8 steerer. So 31.8 is 1 1/4, I believe. Obviously this is a 1 1/8, so when you buy the Farsports kit they do give you reducers. This is a straight, this is the angled one, so I've got it in slightly rise position, or I can run it in slightly dip position, or I can just use the straight one. So I've got a bit more stack out of this, and now actually the stack on this is actually higher than the TCR. So I could knock out another spacer, but I'm not going to, because it means I'm going to have to cut the fork, which means uncabling it all. Now, one of my favourite things, it's such a good thing to be back on a 27.2 round seat post. So much more comfortable for the same tyre pressure than a deep aero post or the TCR Advanced SL, which has got a fixed seat post. It's just an absolute dream. You can run the tyres slightly harder, but you still get a pleasant feel. You're not shaking around. So yeah, really nice to be back on a round seat post. So cheers, and I'll see you in the next one.